So much for being here, for spending this time with us. People may already know you. Those are the familiar with 5G and the conversation from your testimony at the Michigan House Energy Committee hearings on 5G in late 2018. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation because with your background and your extensive knowledge and expertise in medicine, in electromagnetic radiation, we're going to give a really powerful set of grounded facts and perspectives today in this conversation. So really looking forward to dive in. And I'm just going to share with our audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll get started. So Dr. Sharon Goldberg is an integrative internal medicine physician. She is one of a small but growing number of physicians to have completed the Advanced Electromagnetic Radiation coursework with the Building Biology Institute. And by the way, Larry Gust is in the summit as well, so we had a great conversation.
He's one of my teachers.
Excellent. And has technical experience with electromagnetic field assessment and remediation. Her background includes 15 years as an academic hospital medicine physician and medical educator responsible for the training of medical students and resident physicians at teaching hospitals in New York City and the University of Miami. She has co-authored publications in the fields of dietary supplementation, autonomic nervous system assessment, and nutritional epidemiology. And Dr. Goldberg is an editorial member of the journal Electromagnetic Biology and Medicine. So very extensive background. We'll dive right in. How did you first become aware of the effects from electromagnetic radiation?
Well, I was just like everyone else. I didn't think twice about carrying a cell phone in my pocket, on my body, using it all the time. It's about 5 years ago, and I was working at the University of Miami, where my cell phone came from the Department of Medicine. So I was due for a new phone. I wanted an iPhone. I had a BlackBerry. I brought the new phone home, and I had a conference call that I did holding it on speaker like this for 20 minutes. And by the end of the call, my finger was burning. It was like a neuropathic pain that a diabetic would get in their toes, like a burning pain in my finger. And I thought, wow, this is not okay. What's going on? So I started reading that night about electromagnetic fields from phones and health effects. And I was really shocked to find out that actually there was a lot of science to show that the conditions that we treated in the hospital and in internal medicine clinics, there's a lot of science to show that the pathophysiology overlaps with the effects of electromagnetic fields. So that was a big shocker for me and an eye-opener. And the next morning, of course, I brought my phone back to my administrator, and I asked her for a low SAR phone, which I got the following week. So, and it turns out
a lesser radiation phone, so just SAR, specific absorption rate.
Exactly.
So a phone that microwaves less power, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's the amount of radiation per unit weight. So it's a measurement. It's not such a great measurement, but it does measure something. And in this case, the phone that I had been given was an iPhone 5, which I was told many years later was actually a high radiation phone. And then I switched it to one that, at least on paper, is less, lower radiation phone. So that's how I got interested in it. That was 5 years ago, but that got me really interested in it because I had been, like you mentioned, I had been doing some research and doing a lot of teaching with medical students and residents, and one of the things that is a big issue for all physicians is that our patients have just been becoming sicker and sicker with every passing year. Internal medicine used to be essentially geriatrics when I started 20 years ago. We didn't have the young people that were hospitalized in internal medicine wards all had a reason to be there. They weren't just there. And when I say a reason to be there, I mean they would be dialysis patients. They would have epilepsy. They would have autoimmune disorder or some type of acute infection or other issues. But everything was kind of clear, and we knew why they were there. What's been happening over the past 20 years is that internal medicine patients have becoming younger and younger with more and more comorbid conditions, so like a longer list of diseases that they come in and longer medication lists. So this has been a challenge for, I think for all physicians, but also for medical educators who deal with medical students, because in my last couple of years at the University of Miami, I saw something that I had never seen, which is medical students would, show up on our ward their first day for their clerkships, and they would look at how sick the patients were, and you could just see it in their eyes that they were burnt out already. Like they were like, and how can you teach someone to take care of a simple medical problem like abdominal pain in a patient who has a history of stroke, heart attack, cancer, this long list of problems. So that's how I got into it.
What are some of the common misperceptions in your view of EMFs and EMFs? Electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic radiation being in interchangeable terms.
Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of misperceptions, a lot. But I think that the biggest one, really, I think I'll mention two. The biggest one is that we keep hearing that there's this controversy or debate in the scientific literature about whether or not electromagnetic fields, and I guess I'll speak specifically about microwave radiation, because this is about 5G and about wireless radiation. So I'm speaking about microwave radiation now. The misconception is that we don't have enough science to make a decision as far as whether or not we need to warn the public and take action to lower exposures. And this is completely false. We have such clear evidence that microwave radiation, that it is what I would call a broad spectrum pathogen. So it causes all sorts of different diseases, and a multi-site carcinogen. So it causes cancer in many different parts of the body. And we understand a lot, a whole bunch of basic mechanisms about why this would be. We understand that. So it's completely false from the scientific perspective when you hear, well, we need more research. That it's still a debate. That there isn't anything to debate. So that's I think the biggest misperception out there. The other thing that I think people don't understand is we assume that there are health protective guidelines out there, that everyone cites the FCC guidelines for EMF, for microwave emissions, as being protective of human health. So actually this couldn't be further from the truth, because first of all, these guidelines, they are decades old, and the reason that they were set as high as they are is because they needed to, when all of the conference of the people got together to figure out where were they going to set the limits. It was a time when the military needed microwaves for military telecommunications and for radar. It was very important. If you go back, and I believe it was in the 60s, the late 60s, when they first set these levels, and they set them intentionally high to allow for military uses. And it was important at the time because we believed that the country was under threat for nuclear war, and this was important. So that's where everything started. But then the problem is that the guidelines were never revised, and so they're based on this false assumption that if microwaves don't, so we call it the thermal effect, but essentially what that means is if the level of radiation, if it's not enough to heat you, it's not enough to harm you. That we know now is completely false, and we actually knew in the 70s that this was false, because, and I can show you, I have this book called The Biological Effects of Microwaves from 1976, and they actually write in this book that it's not enough to say that that microwave exposure, harm from microwave exposure, has to do with thermal effect and nothing else. It's not true. They write it in there, and that's from 1976. So as far as the the health protective guidelines go, these FCC guidelines that are cited all the time as an assurance of safety, so they're not relevant to the chronic daily exposure that we see in our country. They only apply to exposures that are 30 minutes or less. So it's for a short-term exposure. They were developed by engineers and mostly people from industry and the military, and physicians and public health, people with public health training weren't consulted. So I think those are really the two big misperceptions it's really important to understand that there are no guidelines now, that really no one is looking out for our health in a regulatory manner. There's no regulation because the guidelines are simply too high.
And only based on thermal effects, and they don't even look at all of those thousands of studies that are referenced in that book from the 70s, right?
Right. I mean, and that book has oh, and actually I have another two things that I was going to show you. Here's another one right here. Okay. So this is, I picked these because, well, they're good, but does it show up?
Yes. Yeah.
So this is from the Naval Medical Research Institute from 1971. Okay. This is a bibliography of the effects of microwave radiation that they knew about in 1971. And this is really easy to read. It's a bibliography, and it's just sort of a laundry list of all of the effects that they were seeing in the 70s from microwave radiation. So, and it looks like this. Does it show up?
Yep.
It's just A, B, C, D. It's a list of effects. So this is really the bottom line here is if you look at the way public health has deteriorated over the past 20 years, and I'm not saying that this proves that microwave radiation is the cause of everything. Obviously, it's not the cause of everything. All I'm saying is that there's very compelling science to show that many of the chronic conditions that we see today are linked mechanistically and are linked in the older science that is very accessible to anyone. So to just give you an example, we have an epidemic of suicide in the United States now, depression and suicide that's been going on. And we have states that have a 50% increase in their suicide rates. And this is horrible. This is not, this isn't just because times are tough and people are, something organic is going on. So if you look at this right here, well, what does it say? There's a whole section on psychological disorders, page 9, section F, human behavioral studies. What do they see? Number 1, neurasthenia, which they explain as general bad feeling. Number 2, depression. Number 4, anxiety. Number 8, hallucinations. Number 11, increased irritability, insomnia, loss of memory. So this isn't the only source. So we know that the connections are there. So it's just a matter of blowing the dust off of a lot of the older research and connecting it with our current health situation. And we really need to do this because we can't afford any more sick people. We can't afford to pay for it. We just can't afford it.
Yeah. And we mentioned Larry Gust, president of the board of the Building Biology Institute, who we talked to. So for those that want to dive right into solutions, he goes step by step in how to make your home safe, both from sources of EMFs in the home and outside of the home, and what to do. So highly recommend that talk for everyone. Also, so we talk also with Dr. Ronald Melnick, who, very compelling conversation. He was the designer of one of these many thousands of studies, but a very prominent study called the National Toxicology Program Study on Cell Phone Radiation. It was originally commissioned in the late 90s by the FDA, and when the results were finally published in 2016, then again in 2018, the FDA basically said, we're not doing a risk assessment. We're not going to look at the data. We're not going to look at the results. It's not applicable to humans. So what is your take on that?
Well, I think that really my most important take is that I don't see any point in funding research if we're going to just blow off the results when they're inconvenient. But really, which is essentially what happened. And this is, from what I understand, and maybe this is not 100% correct, but I've asked a couple of senior people who have worked on these types of studies. I had a question for them about, well, has this ever been done before? Because national toxicology program studies are really the gold standard of exposure studies for a toxicant in the United States. And when you do a national toxicology program study on an agent, if the study shows an association, what ends up happening is that agent gets labeled and it gets listed on our ATSDR, the Agency for Toxic Substances, I think, Disease Registry. It's called ATSDR. Hopefully I'm not messing up what it stands for. And that's what's always happened. And I had asked them, well, is this the first time that this has happened? How is it possible that we can have a positive NTP study showing clear association with cancer of the brain and heart and DNA damage and cardiomyopathy, which is a precursor to heart failure? How is it possible that the study is done and then no actions are taken? And I wasn't able to get a good answer, but the answer, what I understood, is that this is a first. That it's the first time that a national toxicology program study has been just disregarded completely. So as far as the results being non-applicable to humans,